Few sleep disruptions are as frustrating as waking up at the exact same time every night. You go to bed, fall asleep without issue, and then find yourself staring at the ceiling at 3 a.m., night after night, as reliably as an alarm clock you never set. The pattern feels meaningful, and for many people, it triggers a quiet but persistent anxiety about whether something is wrong. Sleep experts say the reality is more nuanced than most people assume. Waking up at the same time each night is far more common than it appears, and in most cases it reflects a combination of basic biology and habitual behavior rather than a serious medical problem. Understanding the specific reasons behind this pattern is the first step toward either accepting it or changing it. The biology of sleep, the role that environment plays in nighttime awakenings, and the way behavior can reinforce patterns over time all contribute to why so many people open their eyes at the same hour with such consistency. Sleep specialist Dr. Shelby Harris, a clinical psychologist and author of The Women's Guide to Overcoming Insomnia, and Dr. Angela Holliday Bell, a board-certified physician and sleep specialist, offer clear explanations for each of the main causes. Sleep cycles and the natural architecture of the night. The foundation of the explanation lies in how sleep is actually structured. Sleep does not unfold as a single, uninterrupted state. Instead, it moves through a series of cycles, each lasting approximately 90 minutes, and within each cycle, the brain passes through distinct stages, ranging from light sleep to deep sleep to REM sleep. At the end of each cycle, there is a brief, natural period of lighter sleep during which the brain partially surfaces toward wakefulness. For most people, this transition happens without any awareness. They shift between cycles, pass through the lighter phase, and slide back into the next cycle without ever knowing it happened. Dr. Harris explains that everyone wakes up very briefly between sleep cycles throughout the night, but typically does not know it is happening and goes right back to sleep. The reason this changes in the early morning hours has to do with something called sleep pressure, the biological drive to sleep that builds throughout the day and is gradually discharged through the night. By around 2 or 3 a.m., Dr. Holliday Bell notes, most people have already slept off a significant portion of their sleep pressure. With less biological momentum pushing them into the next cycle, the natural transition between cycles becomes a more vulnerable moment. The brief awakening that normally goes unnoticed becomes more likely to tip into full wakefulness, and once awake, falling back asleep requires more effort than it would earlier in the night. This is why waking at 3 a.m. is so disproportionately common compared to waking at 11 p.m. or midnight. It is not coincidence. It reflects the predictable architecture of sleep and the gradual dissipation of sleep pressure across the night. Environmental triggers that repeat on schedule. The second major category of causes involves the environment rather than internal biology. If something in your surroundings tends to change at a consistent time each night, that change can reliably pull you out of sleep at the same moment. Light filtering through curtains as early morning begins, a partner who tends to shift position or start snoring at a predictable point in the night, traffic sounds that begin at a regular hour, or a household pet moving around at its habitual time are all examples of environmental cues that can anchor a waking pattern to a specific clock time. Temperature is a particularly underappreciated factor. Dr. Holliday Bell explains that body temperature naturally begins to rise in the early morning hours as part of the biological cue to prepare for waking. A sleeping environment that feels comfortable during the first half of the night can become too warm as this temperature shift occurs, and that added warmth can tip the brain toward wakefulness during an already vulnerable transition between sleep cycles. This effect is compounded significantly for people experiencing menopausal night sweats, where internal temperature regulation is already disrupted in ways that make nighttime awakenings more frequent and more difficult to sleep through. Poor sleep hygiene and how daily habits shape nighttime sleep. The third category involves behaviors and habits that affect the quality of sleep even before it begins. Alcohol consumed within 3 hours of bedtime can disrupt the restorative stages of sleep, making sleep shallower overall and increasing the likelihood of waking during the vulnerable early morning transitions. Caffeine consumed within 8 hours of bedtime has a similar effect, interfering with the depth of sleep even when it does not prevent falling asleep initially. Both of these substances are widely understood to affect sleep, but their specific contribution to waking at a consistent time is less commonly recognized. Eating patterns also play a role that most people do not consider. Blood sugar can drop at a predictable point during the night if a person goes too long without eating before bed, and that dip can trigger a physical signal that pulls the brain toward wakefulness. On the other side of the spectrum, eating a large meal immediately before sleep can cause gastrointestinal discomfort, acid reflux, or bloating that surfaces at a predictable point during the night when digestion reaches a particular stage. Fluid intake before bed introduces the more straightforward issue of needing to urinate, which tends to follow a consistent biological timeline based on when fluids were consumed. How behavior reinforces and perpetuates the pattern. Perhaps the most psychologically interesting cause of consistent nighttime waking is the way behavior after waking can actually strengthen and entrench the pattern over time. Dr. Holliday Bell identifies this as a form of conditioned learning. If you wake at 3 a.m. and immediately reach for your phone, turn on a light, start scrolling, or engage in any other stimulating behavior, your brain begins to associate that particular time with being awake and active. The brain is efficient at forming these associations, and over time, the association itself becomes a trigger. Instead of waking up because of a sleep cycle transition or an environmental cue, you begin waking up partly because your brain has learned that 3 a.m. is when you check your phone. This conditioned pattern can persist even after the original trigger that first caused the waking has been resolved. The behavior that followed the waking becomes its own cause, which is why addressing what you do after waking is just as important as addressing the reasons you woke in the first place. Practical steps for breaking the pattern. Dr. Holliday Bell's first piece of guidance is both simple and counterintuitive. Not worrying about these wake-ups can itself make a meaningful difference in how easily you fall back asleep. Anxiety about being awake at 3 a.m. activates the nervous system and makes returning to sleep significantly harder. Approaching the waking with calm acceptance rather than frustration or alarm removes one of the most reliable obstacles to falling back asleep. In the moment of waking, avoiding the phone and anything else that engages the brain stimulatingly is the most important immediate action. Keeping the room cool through breathable bedding and appropriate temperature settings, cutting back on alcohol and afternoon caffeine, ensuring the sleep environment is dark and quiet, and building a consistent wind-down routine before bed are the practical environmental and behavioral adjustments most likely to reduce the frequency of nighttime awakenings over time. For people who try these approaches and find that the pattern persists despite consistent effort, consulting a doctor is the appropriate next step. In a smaller number of cases, consistent nighttime waking can be connected to underlying conditions including sleep apnea, where breathing interruptions cause repeated arousals at predictable points during the night, or hyperthyroidism, where elevated thyroid hormone levels affect the nervous system in ways that disrupt sleep architecture. A physician can identify whether an underlying condition is contributing to the pattern and guide treatment accordingly. But for the majority of people who wake at the same time every night, the explanation lies in the biology, environment, and habits described here, all of which are addressable with the right information and a willingness to make targeted changes.